This is episode 1168.
The time to market now on organically built stuff is contracting really dramatically.
Yeah.
I think the rate at which we can develop product, I think there's projects we're completing in weeks and months, which if you ask senior developers and you ask our CTOs, like, how long would have this taken you a decade ago? It's like, it would have been a multi-year project. So there's the time to market, whether on organic stuff, is really contracting. That gives us flexibility to start getting creative about what we're going to do with that capacity that we now have. But historically, the reason to buy would have been to get exposure to a market where we had no presence, so a geographic thing, or to buy functionality which it would have taken too long to effectively build for ourselves and really get a commercial outcome from in the investment time horizon.
For many finance leaders, the career path begins with mastering accounting rules and reporting frameworks. But sometimes the experiences that shape a future CFO arrive much earlier and in far less predictable settings. My guest today began his career not inside a traditional audit track, but in Deloitte's restructuring practice, where he sat across from CFOs navigating covenant pressure, cash flow uncertainty, and difficult strategic decisions. That early exposure offered a rare vantage point into how finance leaders actually operate when the stakes are highest. Today, he sits at the intersection of finance leadership and finance technology, helping shape tools designed specifically for the office of the CFO. Our talk with CFO Alistair Gurney begins after this.
They say do what you love and the money will follow. My passion for making life beautiful led to a successful design firm, booming online sales, and a TV show. It also led to chaos, endless spreadsheets, and no single source of truth. We couldn't scale, so we chose NetSuite by Oracle. Now I get immediate visibility across the business, from revenue to customers and fulfillment. Clean, simple, beautiful. NetSuite is critical to the success of my business.
Hello, CFO Alistair Gurney is with us. Alistair brings a finance leadership journey shaped by both advisory and operating experience. Early in his career, he spent more than 8 years at Deloitte, gaining exposure to a wide range of companies and financial challenges. He later moved into operating roles across several enterprise software firms, including Unit 4, an Irish software group, before stepping into the CFO role at Dot Digital, a publicly traded SaaS company. Today, as CFO of Lucanet, Alistair sits at the intersection of finance leadership and finance technology, helping guide a platform designed specifically for CFOs as they rethink how the finance function will operate in a far more data-driven and AI-enabled world. Alistair, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jack.
So, Alistair, I mentioned to you up front, I went and visited the site, and I was struck by how CFO-centric it seemed to be with the CFO in mind. I have to say that having visited quite a few finance technology sites. But we'll begin here, which is to ask you to look back and try to identify for us where you believe you gained the experience you needed to do this job, this role, this CFO leadership role.
Thanks, Jack. So my curiosity, as you mentioned, started with a relatively long stint at Deloitte. I was in their restructuring team. Great foundational work, because that's you're not too focused on auditing, you're not too focused on accounting, frankly, but you're getting into the commercial operations of the business. You're looking at the cash flow of the business, the forecasting of the business, kind of interesting strategic decisions that are being made by a CFO. While I was there, like, the most interesting part of that role was interviewing CFOs when I was reviewing their business. So fairly quickly the idea formed that actually I kind of want their job, not my job. And that took me for a very slightly circuitous route into the world of private equity software businesses. The first one of scale I was at was Irish Software Group. I supported them through an exit process, which is kind of a key Key skill, I suppose, to have in that private equity world. And then went on into a commercial finance role, again, getting exposures to the whole sales organization and the marketing organization, that whole, the way the business really generates value. So a level of commercial exposure, which I think is not totally normal for most folk doing finance controlling type roles. And then just scaled up really. So Unit 4 was a slightly bigger version of a similar type of business. Went through another large exit with those guys. Before taking a CFO role with Dot Digital, stepping out of the private equity world into the public traded, but still using many of those same skills, looking at the productivity of the business, looking at how we scale internationally, all of these types of decisions. And that I think put me on the right track to get the role at Lucanet, which has been a lot of fun for the last year.
I think you mentioned you early on while you were at Deloitte, you got exposed to some of the CFOs out there. I'm wondering if there was a particular client or project that changed perhaps how you saw the finance role.
One or two come to mind, but I think the thing that was striking, we always started a business review. We were looking at the future cash flow capacity of the business, really, to support a new debt structure. That initial interview with the CFO was insightful because you quickly realized that they weren't only focused on the data, which would be in a traditional transaction services diligence deck. There was a level of operational insights and a level of engagement with the whole business and not just the financials of the business, which I found quite striking, having been kind of trained and spent my time just poring over P&L, cash flow, balance sheet alone. As that more expansive mindset, I suppose, which I find the guys were very impressive. You had this sort of broad understanding of what was going on in their businesses and an intellect and an interest that was enjoying that.
Did you arrive inside the restructuring group? Were you hired into that, or did you have to find your way there?
I did. So I joined Deloitte as a graduate, and I think there were something like 1,200 auditors who started that year, and there were 4 of us in the restructuring team. So it was a niche way of getting into an accountancy training contract. But
was that good for you? I mean, is there something about that nice small sort of SWAT team, or how did you look at it?
Yeah, it's fantastic. You have a lot of exposure straight away. So within the first few weeks, few months, you're actively participating in our project. You're not kind of being moved around through a training program and a kind of anonymous, interchangeable member of a huge accounting firm. You're part of a very small team, which is out busy doing stuff. So I'm kind of there, inserted in the business. We were appointed as administrators of a company. I was there within, I think, 3 months of starting my first proper job after university. And I'm on site. I'm talking to employees. I'm talking to suppliers. I'm talking to customers. I'm really getting a level of commercial exposure, which you can't, like, frankly, you just can't get by doing tax returns or overseeing a business.
Are these companies distressed, some of them?
Yes. Yeah, generally. So in that case, very much so. It was an administrator had been appointed, so equivalent to the Chapter 11 type situation. But quite often after that, my advisory work was generally with companies where they had breached their financial covenants or were very close to breaching their financial covenants. And we were working either for the company or for the lenders to try and help them resolve that situation.
So we know that you move into as you move into industry, it's really enterprise software companies that kind of pop out on your resume. What did those different environments teach you about scaling a finance organization? I think you're within the finance group, but tell us.
So in each role, I would say I probably learned slightly different things. At the time I was at Iris, it was a very UK focused business. Now it's actually got a much larger US business. But while I was there, very much UK. But we were going through a transaction process, and then we restructured the management team from a vertical alignment, let's say, into more of a matrix organization. So that was an interesting transition process and an interesting exposure to the way you can align a finance team to the wider management of a business. Unit 4 is a different challenge. It's far more international. It has big legacy local centers of control, which we had largely broken down by the time I joined, but there's still a lot of work to be done to standardize, normalize central functions and so on. So again, building that central capacity in FP&A in particular was a real focus there. So different skills from those two roles before my first CFO role.
What lessons from operating inside a public company have stayed with you most?
So I think there's a lot of discipline required with regards to managing investor expectations, and managing the P&L of the business to align with those expectations. That's I wouldn't say a dark art, but it takes a bit of focus, which is not necessarily the kind of 100% commercial focus which you would get from some different environments. So there's a discipline there which is important around reporting and investor relations, certainly.
You became more disciplined, but did it influence how you think about transparency or communication?
It's certainly about communication. I think if anything, the transparency levels are very high in either role. I don't think you can have an effective relationship with your board unless you're super transparent in either environment. But how to communicate and how to moderate communication depending on different audiences, it definitely added a string to my bow in that respect.
I want to just return again to your experience at Deloitte, because am I right? I don't want to overstate this, but that's where you were sitting across the table from C-suite executives who are restructuring their companies. And you were part of those discussions at a fairly early part of your career. Am I overstating that?
No, that's fair. That's fair.
So you took that with you as you leave. You have a comfort level already with the C-suite that others perhaps wouldn't achieve until, a few more career chapters. It accelerated your path, is what I suspect.
I felt comfortable in that company. I can't speak for other people's progress relatively, but no, it was definitely great exposure very early in my career. And I think dealing with some topics which are necessarily quite sensitive issues in some cases, whether it's because of the financial risk or huge human capital implications that go with some of those situations. I think it forces you to think, let's say, slightly more holistically than if you were simply focused on the financial impact.
When we began, it sounded like you fairly quickly decided you wanted to be a CFO. Was that in fact the case? And we're wondering, what was that moment when you realized the CFO path was the direction you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, fairly quickly. It was during that period, I guess 5-6 years into my time at Deloitte, I was fairly clear that was the path I would ultimately go down, as opposed to trying to follow through from where I was and become a partner within the practice. Then it was really a question of timing as to when it made most sense to step out.
What do you recall how some of the leaders, as you reflect back on some of the leaders you came in contact during your early years, how your leadership has been influenced by them? Yeah, positive or negative. There must have been some CFOs who are still from a sort of a traditional mode, and some that were thinking more strategically, let's say.
Yeah, I think I've had, by virtue of moving around to various different companies, I've had exposure to quite a few different personality types. I would say it's not just the CFOs I've worked with that shape that, but other people around the team, other board members as well. And I would say I had a couple of roles that were much smaller before I went to Iris, and I probably learned, in some ways, I learned more from an emotional point of view, an emotional intelligence perspective at those roles than I have subsequently in more established organizations, which are perhaps more stable in some ways. Coming out of practice, things were very regimented in a sense. There was clear career levels, clear progression, clear reporting lines. And whilst partners have different approaches, it's sort of broadly the same game each time you go into a project. Whereas going into two very different companies, first one I had a CEO who was like 35 years old, I think. The second time I had a CEO who's close to 70, and had fundamentally different expectations of what they would be getting from me as a head of FP&A and finance director, respectively. I would say like one of those jobs went really well for me, the other one not so much. And frankly, it's because I, at that time, wasn't mature enough to moderate my style to be optimally effective in that environment. However good my commercial judgment may have been, I wasn't as impactful as I could have been if I just simply played my hand better. So it was quite a, in some ways bruising, but hugely informative experience to go through.
Oh, some interesting insight there for us. Thank you. We do want to ask you a few more career-related questions a little later in the podcast, but right now let's find out about Lucanet. Tell us about this company. We already hinted a little bit about it. What does it do, though, and what makes its value proposition stand out today for CFOs?
So we are squarely focused on the mid-market CFO, mid-market office of the CFO, and we provide a suite of tools which make their life easier. It makes it a great job for me because I get to moonlight in every department in a business. I'm not just the CFO, but I can advise on product. I can advise on how we market. I can get involved in sales calls. It's fantastic. So I get really broad exposure. But we're, at the heart, we're trying to do stuff which makes the office of the CFO work better. The product we've sold most of historically is a consolidation tool. So taking source data from any number of accounting systems and giving you a clean consolidation, but also help that close process so that all the reconciliations are smooth and relatively speaking, easy to complete and so on. We've also got good tax functionality, really strong tax products in Germany in particular. But like lease accounting and banking cash management functionality, and more recently, through an acquisition now well established about 18 months in, we've got an FP&A tool, XP&A as we call it, which is fully integrated, not just with our I'm talking about our usage of the tool. It's not just integrated with the ERP system, but across the whole software stack. So we have our HR data, we have our CRM data, and various other sources going in there as well, which makes it a really useful tool for sort of dynamic planning use cases.
Useful tool. What types of finance teams tend to find this useful, tend to benefit most from the platform?
So if you have multiple legal entities and consolidation is in any way a headache, which it will be if you have multiple legal entities, you should have a tool like Lucanet to help with that consolidation, certainly. I think from a planning point of view, having a planning tool which is integrated to the source financial data and creates, if you like, a load of scaffolding around your planning is a huge step up from Excel as well. Just from a version control, change control, if you like, the discipline of forecasting, really useful, but also the stable data integrations that come with that. I think it's a lot more robust than the kind of historical Excel spreadsheet, which required a new data dump to be put in once in a while. And sometimes the columns moved and it broke the whole spreadsheet, all of this stuff. So it avoids a lot of those issues. So I think that discipline and control around forecasting is much easier to maintain with a proper tool there.
You mentioned jurisdictions, the consolidations that need to take place. Tell us a little bit about the company, where its origins are, what part of the world, and where your customers are. Yeah. So
Lucanet's origins are German, remains our strongest market, but we've also got pretty established markets now in Netherlands, Switzerland, the rest of DAC, fast-growing businesses in France, Italy, Spain, UK, China, Singapore as well. So we're moving towards getting a majority of our new logo bookings from outside DAC and NL, what have historically been our stronger markets. Broad geographic scope. We're slowly filling out the functional gaps we see to kind of create a more complete suite of tools for the CFO. So, for example, adding the XP&A tool, but also some disclosure management functionality, which we've had, but we've been augmenting recently. XBRL tagging capabilities, that's now fully agentic, so you don't need to manually tag your accounts anymore. Things like this, which can really save a lot of time for users.
Can you provide us with we like to call it an abbreviated history of the capital structure?
It was a founder-run business for, I'm going to say, about 18 years, but I've got the exact number wrong. And then HG Capital bought in with a majority investment in 2022. And we've been running with HG support since then. So growth in the last few years has been pretty significantly accelerated with their support. And that's one of the things that's really sort of driven this expansion, the product offering, but also the geographic expansion that we've been pursuing as well.
Okay, so you've been in the role roughly a year. I would suspect you weren't as focused on perhaps the CFO and finance leadership if we took back 5 years, 10 years ago. This sharpening focus, is that something that's transpired over the last 3 years, including your watch this last year?
So sharpening focus on what? Sorry.
The CFO and finance leadership. Was the company always, and I think you said it goes back 18 years. Is that right?
No, so I think it's a, so I think from a product perspective, yes, their origin story is in building this consolidation tool, which was very successful. So clearly that is focused on the office of the CFO. I think, interesting, our own operations, I was taking a vacant seat, actually. There was a very strong VP finance, he's still with us, but no actual board level CFO for a period of time before I joined. So I think there has our own focus on that role and the importance of that role adding value to our business is kind of mirrored by how we see the importance of that role in our customers and potential customers. So that's one of the reasons for me joining, is to be that advocate for our customers and for our product as well.
I'm intrigued how the company grew out of Germany, and just in regards to middle market companies, we know Germany has sort of a robust middle market.
Yeah.
Although I think their middle market businesses might be a little different from our middle market makeup here in the U.S. I'm just curious if you can reflect a little bit about how this company's origins has perhaps made it better than others to serve the middle market, understand the middle market, develop technology for the middle market.
So if I take the consolidation tool as the example, because that's the one that's sort of driven most of the historical growth. To be really effective, that almost has to be built in a way that works perfectly cross-border, right? You're almost always integrating international entities. And one of the things it's there to do is enable you to pull in data from multiple different jurisdictions and report under different gaps. So we can report under German GAAP, we can report under IFRS, we have different management accounting rules depending on the audience. And we can toggle between those views very efficiently. The capability to do that naturally makes the tool work in any jurisdiction. And we obviously have the translation capability, so you can work in your local language without any impediments. So I think after growing very organically in the DACH region with the German headquarters, it wasn't difficult to start to grow up into Benelux, and then you quickly find this inbound demand from the rest of Europe. The growth into China is a slightly different story. We had 2 employees in Germany who were Chinese, and they thought this tool would work so well at home. Why don't we go and start up the business there? So they traveled from Berlin back to China and built our Chinese business. So again, it's a nice testament to the fact that it works everywhere. And now it's just a case of measuring our resources so that we can grow efficiently as we can in as many regions as possible.
Many software companies are balancing growth and profitability. How do you think about that balance at Lucanet?
We think a lot about that. I think we're rule of 60 now, so we're pretty happy that we've got that balance working. So rapidly expanding EBITDA margins as we grow. A lot of leverage coming through in the last year and in this year's budget as well. We've kept growth above 30% for a number of years now. And that's organic growth as opposed to acquisitive, right? So we've focused a lot on the customer acquisition costs and the magic number, both marketing magic number and overall go-to-market magic number. So long as that works and our churn stays at or below 5%, we'll grow efficiently. We don't need to. The rest takes care of itself.
We imagine when it comes to metrics, that traditional SaaS metrics are a big part of your world, your week.
Yeah.
At the same time, we wonder if there's a particular metric that you have helped raise the profile of over this last 12 months. Or maybe you've educated the organization a little differently about it, why it matters, or maybe it's why it doesn't matter. We're spending too much time looking at this number where we should be looking at these other three. I don't know.
I'm not going to claim I've taught the business how to do this. It was pretty mature before I started. What we've got into in a lot more detail over the last year is analysis of our pipeline, and not just looking at a value in pipe or the amount closed, but really at every stage of the pipeline, the conversion rates between stages, the timing between stages, and so on. So really trying to break down in detail how that go-to-market funnel works, and therefore the sort of constituent parts of that customer acquisition cost. That's been an area of like growing focus, and I've got an example of that I think we'll probably touch on later.
I wanted to ask you about the build versus buy mindset. What leads you to organic outcomes versus acquisitions?
I mean, simple answer I say is time to market. I think it's a fascinating question at the moment, though, because the time to market now on organically built stuff is contracting really dramatically.
Yeah.
I think the rate at which we can develop products, I think there's projects we're completing in weeks and months, which if you ask senior developers and you ask our CTOs, like, how long would have this taken you a decade ago? It's like, it would have been a multi-year project. So there's the time to market, whether on organic stuff, is really contracting. That gives us flexibility to start getting creative about what we're going to do with that capacity that we now have. But historically, the reason to buy would have been to get exposure to a market where we had no presence, so a geographic thing, or to buy functionality which it would have taken too long to effectively build for ourselves and really get a commercial outcome from in the investment time horizon.
How are you seeing AI and automation change the expectations placed on finance teams today?
I think that more is how it changes my own expectations of the team. And I hope that pretty much echoes the expectations on me. But I expect to be able to do at least a sort of proof of concept type analysis almost immediately. It shouldn't take time to get a hypothesis from analysis, really. We've done all of the foundational work to get our data organized, largely through our own tooling, but a broader program across the business as well, to have good access to consistent data across the business. And therefore, being able to analyze that with AI tooling means that we can get to at least, as I say, kind of proof of concepts type level of answer very, very quickly, where previously you might have spent some time doing that. Similarly, tasks, if I look at the pure finance processes as opposed to the FP&A piece, we have an expectation of just doing stuff way quicker now. Like, we can work on reconciliations a lot faster than we would have had to do if everything was manual and you're pouring through the accounts trying to find the matching item, So there's a lot of tooling that we can use, capability, but whether it's just off-the-shelf LLM functionality or products that we're building and using within the Lucanet platform. But I think it really changes our expectation as to how long it should take to close accounts, how long it should take to do certain reconciliations, these kinds of things.
You must love sitting in on when finance teams are cross-examining your salespeople. Can you reflect a little on the unique place and time that you're experiencing here as the CFO who has a technology for CFOs? Yeah.
Yeah, it's good fun. I get spend a lot of time with our product team thinking about how, like, what we want next. So the question is, what's the next thing you need in the team? Because if it's the next thing I need, then it's probably the next thing a lot of our customers need too.
Yeah.
So I get to have some input into what's on the roadmap and what we prioritize. So we're trying to identify those things which give the biggest return first to the user. I think there's various bits of peripheral functionality you could think of, but I think if we can get kind of automated reconciliation, kind of agentic support for that whole month-end process, we can make a huge difference to the workflow and the life of people in finance teams. So we get to focus on that. I spend less time directly with sales, although I will quite often have sessions with either our existing account managers or a new logo team to talk through, like, what's the value proposition that matters to me as a user? Like, what is it about this that's actually going to be the hook that people are going to be interested in? But also demonstrating it. So I tend not to do the demoing myself. Like, our own team tests all of our product before it gets released onto our customers. So we'll provide that feedback to say, this is how it should be used. This is how it can be, like, how it can deliver best value for the customer. And I think if our sales teams are able to really authentically explain that to potential customers, we think that's quite a valuable insight for them to have.
So this question seems appropriate. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for AI in finance workflows?
I think almost anything that is a repetitive task, there's potential to have the heavy lifting of that done agentically. And then the role of the finance professional becomes one of process monitoring, quality control, and communication, as opposed to trying to repeat a task as accurately as possible on a regular basis. Where I think that takes us is away from a monthly close and towards just having accurate accounts. My ideal scenario is that in a couple of years, the month-end close is slightly irrelevant. I can just tell you on any given day, this is where we're at so far. We're still work in progress towards that. I think it starts with contracting that month-end timetable down, and then eventually getting it to being a repeatable daily process as opposed to a monthly process.
Can you reflect a little for us on the sort of the shift in the skills mix that finance teams have, how that's going to evolve? Where is it headed? What will the teams look like in 3 to 5 years?
So I don't think the need for a strong technical understanding goes away, albeit I will admit, as you know, I didn't start in the strongest, if you like, technical accounting background. I did qualify as an accountant, but it wasn't the main focus of my training. It's really helpful to be able to test a perfect encyclopedia on how to apply accounting rules. And I can look on Claude or ChatGPT and get that answer in seconds, which previously was taken some amount of research. That's helpful. But I think that the big skill difference, the additional skill we now are looking for, is that ability to look at a process and codify it and really understand what the process is, as opposed to simply following the steps. Because I think if we can understand that process better, we can then start to turn it into an agentic workflow, which isn't possible by just having really competent technical accountants working in the team.
So, looking ahead a few years, we'll stay with this. How do you expect AI to reshape the CFO toolkit? And I mean, what capabilities will distinguish the most effective finance leaders in that environment?
So I think it enables us to be way more proactive. So I think that at the moment, we quite often find things out because we've gone looking for them. And then once we found them out, we can prosecute whatever idea it is around the business and try and affect positive change. I think where that moves to is that we'll be able to spot the anomalies, we'll be able to spot the issues far, far more quickly. Maybe even be spotting where there's a kind of statistical anomaly which you wouldn't actually have noticed if it was just left to the naked eye, looking over some numbers on a monthly basis. So I think that enables us to be far more proactive in supporting the wider leadership team, and to be a really central part of a very dynamic management process.
Before we leave the sort of the business segment here, I'm curious just about expansion globally. Whether is there a reason you would acquire for the customer set, or is it all about being technology driven, or what would you?
Of course. Of course. I think it's really helpful to have access to a customer base in a region. I think that the customers for products like ours, the customer base is typically very sticky, and therefore it has a high value. To the extent we believe we have better product than a business we can acquire, there's a great migration story which we can apply. So we could take customers using a product which they may be happy with, they may not be happy with, but one way or another they definitely need the service, and we can give them a really great option to move to a better product. At the right valuation point, that makes a lot of sense for the business. Makes a lot of sense for the customer base being acquired as well. And I think also just getting a critical mass in a country is quite important to get the flywheel started as well. So we would consider, it's not something we're actively working on, but we would certainly consider looking at regional based acquisitions because they give us that.
So it would seem like
momentum.
If I understand correctly, and I seldom dwell on this, but it seems kind of interesting to me. You mentioned how AI has allowed product development periods to contract, that there's so much that can be accomplished in shorter amounts of time. And just as far as M&A is concerned, it's kind of put you on more of a even playing ground with larger players, but it's the customer base that would be, you can't replicate with AI necessarily, and is perhaps a good, a stronger criteria now for acquisitions. Am I overstating that, or I'm not stating it well? But
I think it can be either. I think insight into product is still really valuable. Just because you can build it, it doesn't mean you know what you need to build. It doesn't mean you have necessarily the taste to get exactly that feature right. Yeah. So I think there's still a place for M&A to extend the scope of our offering where there's just a great product and it can accelerate what we do. But yeah, the other side of it is acquiring a customer base, is like clearly a big motivation behind a lot of options.
Okay, well, thank you for allowing us to ask you a few additional questions there. We want to move to what we refer to as our mentoring round. And again, this is where we ask you to look back in time for us and just share a moment of insight that you experienced, a period of insight that you've experienced, some chapter from your career that revealed to you how finance plays a strategic role. Anything come to mind?
I sort of nearly touched on it earlier. But an example while I've been at Lucanet, which I think it helped me think about how a lot of the different strands we talk about as a business are coming together. So we, as you know, been expanding rapidly, expanding internationally, blessed with a great growth rate. These are not bad problems. But what's gone along with that is we've invested very heavily in marketing to further accelerate that, and particularly trying to get a critical mass of activity in regions where we don't have an existing large mature customer base. it's fair to say that sometimes that works brilliantly and sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so we'll do things that aren't working out perfectly. But we've got to keep trying. We've got to place these bets because otherwise we will not be able to sustain our growth rate longer term. There's a cap in any given geography about how fast we can acquire customers. It's like how often they come to market. So around, well, I guess Q2 last year, we were looking at some of our marketing returns data. And what was immediately kind of obvious is we weren't getting the return on some marketing investments that we wanted. We'd increased investment. We weren't getting as much of an increase in output and bookings. But what could easily, if I look back to 5 years, what could easily have been well cut the cost then because you're not getting a return on it. Because as much as growth is a driver, as I said, it has to be productive growth, efficient growth. Instead, having introduced a dedicated FP&A team since I joined, we had business partnering resource that was close to the whole go-to-market organization. We'd recently built a revenue ops function which pulled together the marketing operations, sales operations, and so on to get that whole sort of end-to-end visibility to go-to-market flow. And we'd also got data engineering to pull together integrated data sets from all of the different marketing and sales tools and CRM and so on, so to really get a clear view of what was going on, both from a spend and a return perspective. And those three things together enabled us to do very quick, very granular analysis of actually what was working and what wasn't working. So what could have been a decision to say, well, until we know better, let's just pull the cost just in case, actually became a pretty dynamic reallocation exercise, which is fun to work on because we had people from sales, people from marketing, people from finance, the CEO, all getting involved in the conversation in a pretty informed and like relatively elevated way, I would say. So really like enjoyable team exercise to pull together the action plan. And then the action plan could evolve quickly and change dynamically through the year. Now, the upshot of that, I don't know, I can't test the null hypothesis, but one way or another, we're on budget for our bookings for the start of this year. And I'm pretty sure that if in the middle of last year we had just cut marketing spend, there's no way we would be at this point in time. So there's a nice illustration of how you can pull together the sort of the FP&A capability, data analytics, integrated go-to-market, and get a good outcome. And that was pretty refreshing for me, having seen very good silos trying to do the same thing, but never doing it as quickly or as efficiently in previous businesses.
Nice. Great. Thank you for that. Perfect. We are up to our mentoring round where we want you to think back, and I think it was at Digital, where you stepped into a CFO role for the first time. And again, you had observed CFOs up close. You had dialogues for them, with them for years. But there was something you just didn't fully grasp about the role that within your first 90 days, perhaps you bumped up against. Share with us some impressions, something that you wish someone had told you before you stepped into the role. What is that?
In fairness, I probably was told this. I had a really good mentor in my previous role as CFO I worked for. So maybe I didn't know it, but it still struck me. You feel very exposed, right? You've always had a person to call who knows, well, either they know better or it's their job to take the blame for it. You've always had someone to go to, and suddenly you are the expert, and you're supposed to be the expert in a business that you don't know because it's a new job and you've just started there. Now, okay, if you're promoted internally, maybe you don't have that risk, but so you're the person at the table who knows the least about the organization and you're expected to know the answer, and you've got no one to escalate that to. So that's a bit scary. Or can be a bit scary, but I think what I quickly learned is just take a beat and back yourself. Like, you have that role because you have the ability to assimilate all the information from the different sources and make a judgment with the skill set you have, which is not the same skill set as the CRO, is not the same skill set as the CTO, etc. But you can add something to that conversation. And and they want you to make the right decision. They're not trying to catch you out. So I quickly just start really relying on the people around me in a way that I think as a individual contributor or as a team leader, you're kind of inclined to say, "Oh, let me fix this so that I can give the perfect answer to the person above me." Once you are that person, I found myself just looking around to the team around, be like, "Look, you need to bring me up to speed on this. You need to bring me up to speed on this. I need help with this analysis. I can't answer that." I became so much more willing to just ask for help from everyone I could. And I think you can't start asking for help too soon, I would say.
Great. Thank you for that. We like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side, Alistair. What is it that most people might not know about you? Something from your past, pursuit, an interest that you have? I don't know, an early career path that didn't pan out. Whatever.
I say my career path has been pretty straightforward. I think we've discussed that. I've always been very goal oriented, not just in my career, but in other sports as well. So I used to do a lot of mountaineering and then running and cycling. So long distance cycling events and, more recently kind of ultra marathon running, on the back of spending my 20s when not working, largely dossing around in the Alps, climbing mountains. So, I always need to have some project, some little thing that I'm working on outside of work.
In mountaineering, give us a milestone that you achieved.
So I climbed the north face of the Matterhorn. That was quite a big step in Europe. We made the first ascent of an ice face in Peru once. That was just before I started at Deloitte.
Is there another one on in the future for you, or is there?
Well, so I had my eldest son is 11 years old now.
Yeah.
And since he was born, I haven't climbed. I think my wife doesn't find the risk profile appropriate to have alongside fatherhood. So I will get back into it. I'm back into skiing now, so I'm edging back into the mountains, but
understood. Oh yeah, you're close.
Not quite there yet.
What about a book or a resource or something that's influenced your thinking along the way?
Good question. I'm not sure there's one single book I would point to. I don't know. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Do you escape? I mean, are they wider than business? Just a variety of interests?
Yeah. So I studied philosophy at university, so I still listen to. I love listening to things that remind me of my undergraduate years.
Yep. Interesting.
So a little bit of philosophy, bit of psychology as well as a joint honours, and then the kind of business economic stuff as well, which is either closely related to work or kind of close enough related that I feel I understand it. You just mentioned your academic years. When you leave leave that behind you and jump into Deloitte, was it always going to be business, or was it just sort of, let's see what if I enjoy this? It wasn't something I really thought about at that time. I'd say over the first 2 or 3 years I was working, my ideas became pretty clear. When I started, my best friend suggested that I needed a job and that training as an accountant opened up various doors. He was right.
well done. Okay, so we're up to our final question. We're going to ask you to look forward finally, and we're after your priorities for the coming 12 months as CFO of Lucanet. What would those be?
Priorities. So we've got a lot of commercial ambition for the business. We want to see our international growth really accelerate, and we're placing quite a few bets around that. So supporting the business, enabling that growth to work and those investments to be success. That's my sort of biggest commercial goal, I'd say. And then I look into the finance team, and I think we've spent a year playing with AI. We're using it ad hoc, and it's made various things more efficient. I think this year we want to move to like consistent structural use of it for specific tasks and actually really accelerate on that roadmap.
Alistair Gurney, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you.